Come on now, we're back for another Man-to-Man podcast, and we can't wait to jump in this week. We got a little something special for you. I'm going to let P. Diddy, Patrick Dean, tell you about it. What's up, Patrick?
We're back to our theological question of the week, and so we have a special guest this week because I don't think we ever really got satisfied with where we ended last week. So, Daniel, you went out and found us somebody that might be able to get us back on the right track. So I'll let you do the introductions, and then we'll jump back into it.
Well, I can't remember if it was before we ended the podcast or after, when I think Patrick said something about, I wish we had somebody with kind of a Middle Eastern worldview on this. And I was like, well, I don't know anybody from the Middle East, but I do know somebody that knows people from the Middle East, and particularly patristic theology. So, so today we've got Dr. Steve McKinion, who is the director of PhD and THM studies at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, my alma mater. And I cannot believe I'm saying this, but 18 years ago, I was finishing my first year at Southeastern. That's mind-blowing. So, he was, Dr. McKinion was my professor for theology, several theology classes, and other classes. I actually worked for him for a couple of semesters. I don't know if he remembers that. You remember that?
Those are my favorite semesters since I've been at Southeastern.
Absolutely. So my favorite McKinion story ever is, so as a teaching fellow, you did all the grading, but then you were also, if he was ever out, you had to teach for him. So he called me. I don't know if you remember this. You called me one day and you said, hey, I need you to fill in for me tomorrow. And I was like, okay, sure. And I think you had been asked to do a chapel for a baseball team that was traveling or something like that. And I said, well, what are we scheduled to teach on? And you said, the three millennial views of eschatology. And I was like, what the heck? So I stayed up all night reading everything that you sent me. And I walked into that classroom, and it was like an auditorium full of people. And I said, if anyone asks a question other than, can you repeat that? Then I will fail every one of you on your next exam. And it was quiet. You probably don't remember that, but that's
well, he wasn't there.
So. No, he wasn't there, but the fact that he gave me like the worst possible subject to teach. I
gave that to you, Daniel, because I didn't have anything to say about it. I didn't know what I was supposed to say, so I thought you could figure it out.
And now 18 years later, I'm repaying that. I don't have anything to say on this topic either, so that's why we've called. That's why we've called you. But anyway, no, Dr. McKinion, discipled me for a couple of years. I don't know if you remember that as well, but we met and read through Galatians, read through Luke. So really formative in my life. But to get back to the topic at hand, because you are I would call you an expert in early patristic theology, and your PhD is in systematic theology from Aberdeen in Scotland. That's kind of a big deal. We kind of wanted to get your take on this topic. So I'm gonna let Patrick kind of refresh everybody's memory on where we left off in that last episode and why we brought the esteemed Dr. Stephen A. McKinion into this conversation.
Just if you'll, before we get into that, I'm sure that we have listeners that don't know what patristic theology is. So could you just give us a quick explanation of that? Because I had to look that up.
He's talking to you, not me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, happy to do that. Yeah. So, the term itself is just the term that comes from the Latin word for fathers and the Greek word for father. And so it's the period of the ancient church. So let's say the first 500 years of the church's life, those early, after the apostles, earliest Christians, and that were working through a lot of these theological issues. How do we explain what the Bible teaches us about God as Father, Son, and Spirit, and how is Jesus both fully God and fully man? So it all is just the theology of these earliest Christians after the time of the apostles. So kind of the close of the New Testament, those first 500 years and as Christianity is spreading around the world.
That's a good summary.
Yeah. So I think that's why, right? Like you bring him into the question because so Dr. McKinnon last week, right? The question and the way we've done this season of the podcast is just to throw out these sort of theological questions that get spurred through either anybody's individual quiet time Bible study. I've had several from my daughters who come home from our student ministry on Wednesday nights and have these great theological questions, and it's like, well, let's dig into that. Let's look into it. So I do that with them, but then I bring them in here and we talk about it. And one of the ones that I think actually came up from a men's group a couple of years ago on Wednesday night discipleship was, who was Cain afraid of?
Yeah.
Right? And that got us probably sidetracked last week, right? Like we I think we answered that question
We just kept going
fairly well. That there most likely was some period of time after the fall before these events where something happened, and just because the Bible doesn't speak to it doesn't mean that there wasn't something else that happened. But then we got into Adam, the garden pre-fall. And because one of the ideas, one of the theories that we promoted was, did Adam and Eve have children in the garden before the fall?
So can you answer that for us?
That's a great question. I think there are a number of things that kind of come up about this conversation that you guys were having. And it's a fascinating conversation. I would start by addressing that issue, kind of that last question you asked about what happens in the garden. And when God creates the man, Adam, he gets this command that he's supposed to obey God, do what God has told him to do, and that the reason for creating the man and the woman, both male and female, creating them, is so that they would reproduce. In other words, the way that humanity is going to come into being is going to come from those two first original human beings. And the picture of what happens in chapter 3 of Genesis is that Adam and Eve, the man and the woman, are in the garden for a very, very short time. So Irenaeus is writing in the 3rd century, and he deals with this issue to some extent. The specific question of how long were Adam and Eve in the garden, what's going on in the garden, and he points out that they really are presented as very like immature, like childish or childlike, in the sense that they don't really have any knowledge or understanding of what wisdom looks like, what right, relationships with God and with one another, what it really is going to look like, kind of in a maturing fashion. And so the unanimous consensus in early Christianity is that Adam and Eve do not have any children in the garden, that they're just for a very short time there. It's almost, I joke with my students in theology that God created Adam and Eve on the 6th day, because he creates Adam first, if you'll remember, and he takes him out of the kind of the land and puts him into a garden, what we call the Garden of Eden. And then in the Garden of Eden is where the woman is formed from his side. And so that seems to like take a whole day. I mean, it does. It's the 6th day that God is doing this. And then immediately after God makes this man and this woman, they encounter the serpent. And so I joke with my students, it's like God makes them on the 6th day, the 7th day rolls around, and then on the 8th day is when this happens. They're like 2 days into the Garden of Eden. Like sometimes we have this impression they lived for, dozens of years, and they were just enjoying, setting up house and enjoying life and all that sort of thing. But the real sense, at least the biblical sense, right? The narrative from chapter 2 to chapter 3 seems to be so quick that you're probably talking about days at the most between when Adam and Eve, when the man and the woman were formed, and when the fall took place in chapter 3. So that's a very quick time period. So it's not like they're having children. Kids aren't being born. They're just trying to kind of figure out what's going on. In fact, what's interesting is Irenaeus even says that when Eve, when the woman sins and or disobeys and transgresses, eats from the tree, he says that she's still a virgin at that point. It's so early in this, they've not even known each other, and part of the reason why is because chapter 4 begins with the Adam knowing the woman, being intimate with her, presented at least in the narrative as the kind of the first instance in which something like this happens. So anyway, to say that there are children born in the Garden of Eden, there's no biblical justification for it, and there is actually, I would say, theological reason to reject that children were born in the garden, namely the passing down of this human nature which is fallen. You would have children born prior to the fall, and so there wouldn't be any passing down of a fallen nature. So we can explore any of that, but that's what I would say is you probably don't have any children born in the garden prior to the fall.
This man is a professional at segues, because that takes us to the other thing. So that's fascinating about Irenaeus and the viewpoint that she was still, I mean, I guess you would even call it sexually innocent, even when she was tempted there in the Garden of Eden. Which, I mean, to be honest with you, for all of us, I think it's easy to look at it and go, idiots. But I sinned, as soon as I learned what sin was. So, I mean, they probably lasted longer than I would have in the garden.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, not only that, but in 1 Timothy, Paul talks about this first sin, and actually says of the woman that she was deceived and ate of the tree, that she was deceived and transgressed. So the sense is that she was so innocent, and not innocent in a moral sense. Like we sometimes approach innocence as, well, see, they had never done anything wrong, but the sense of innocence in the text is that there was no knowledge there, for her at least, that she didn't know, because God had spoken to Adam about this, don't eat of the tree. And Adam had it would seem kind of reported that to her, but she didn't, she's deceived into doing this. She's not rebellious and out to, disobey God, in some type of adamant fashion. Paul says that she was deceived by the serpent in order to do this crafty serpent that comes along. So the idea that she was innocent is clearly portrayed in the Bible. And that is where Irenaeus gets this idea, is that she's not really even, quote unquote, of age yet. It's like she's an old child, a young teenager. I tell my students that the picture is, it's like they're teenagers whenever they're formed, right? Where they're just trying to learn. And the reason why God says, don't eat of this tree of wisdom, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is so that they can trust him for wisdom. Like, just do what I tell you. I mean, my kids growing up, there were times I just told them, don't do this. And they're like, why? Because dad said don't do it. They eventually grew up to learn what the why was. But they were just so innocent. They didn't know what was right and wrong. They didn't know what to do and what not to do. And so that seems to be the case with Eve at the time, and with Adam as well. I mean, he knew what he was told not to do, so he disobeyed out of this adamant refusal to obey God. Text doesn't say he was deceived. It says the woman was deceived. He kind of willingly ate. But this picture of them being innocent, not knowing, and again, a very short time period, just seems to be the case. They're not in the garden very long. And that's a mindset we have to have. We have to have this mindset, like, what was it like when they lived there? It's like, we don't really know, because they were just there for such a, like, the afternoon, they're sinning, they're eating of the tree, and it's all done. It didn't last. So
no, that's you talked about the distinction that we've got to make, but I think it's also a distinction that we fail to make, maybe because we just are too busy, or we read through it too quickly, that Eve was deceived, Adam was rebellious. And,
yes.
And I think
which is the reason why. Yeah, no, and Paul says this in Romans 5, right? That through one man, through one man's disobedience, sin enters into the world. And so he's rebellious against God in that sin, whereas the woman is deceived, and which is in a sense, I think, the point that Paul is making in 1 Timothy 2 about teaching, is that it's important that we be taught so that we are not easily deceived, and why pastors have to be teaching constantly the truth, continue to proclaim the truth and teach the truth, so you're not deceived. I don't know that it has anything to do with Cain and Abel, but it is I think, an important point for us to remember.
Yeah, well, we're getting that actually is the road down which we want to go. Patrick, do you have a follow-up for him?
No, that's it. I mean, this all stemmed from that initial question of who was Cain afraid of, and as I said earlier, I think we tackled that even in the text of Genesis 4. It says after some time, Daniel proposed the theory that he might have known that future generations were going to come and that they would judge him for that. And so you have those options there. But where we really got was exactly what you were talking about, is that rebellion from Adam. And how does that equate with Adam's sin nature?
Because, no, so good. Patrick, that's an amazing question and observation.
He's a lawyer.
I think a couple of things. Yeah, no, he's got to be. Yeah, I think a couple of things stand out about it. One is after the Cain and Abel story, where Cain kills Abel, you have God replacing Abel with Seth. And so textually, there is this, in the first two instances, the man, Adam, knew his wife. He was intimate with her. She conceived and gave birth. And this is, as is described as with the Lord's help. And then you have Seth, and it's God has given me a man. Which is a very important, I think, a very important phrase that's there. That the arrival of Seth is kind of it's a different picture of something that's going on here. It's not just, go and be intimate with one another and you can have kids. There's a pattern that's being developed here of God providing a man as a substitute for the other one, for Abel, who is later described as a prophet. For example, Jesus talks about Abel being this first prophet who's preaching from the ground, the blood that continues to preach the gospel. But in chapter 5, it starts with that this happened, that Seth was born when Adam was 130 years old. So, and whether that's 130 years since he was created, or, if he was created at 30 years old, 100 years after that, whatever the case may be, you have 130 years seemingly for people to be born. And the population can explode in 130 years when you've got kids and grandkids and great grandkids and nephews and nieces and all that. So, there's no reason to believe that in that 130 years, there couldn't be a very sizable population. If you just think back, how many people have been born in the 130 years, since prior to us, of one, mom and dad. And all of if you ever done genealogy and you start looking at, and you go back 130 years to your fifth great grandparents or whatever, if they're constantly just having kids over and over, you can get a really sizable population that is there. Not to mention that he goes on and lives for 800 more years. So let's just take into account that you could still have a lot of people who are there. But when Cain does this to Abel and he is afraid, it could be the people right around him that he's afraid of. It doesn't have to be millions of people for him to say, I'm afraid of these folks and what they may do to me or whatever. It could be, 10,000 or several thousand. It doesn't have to be a huge and tremendous amount where he says, I am afraid of these folks who are, who would come and would kill me. So what Moses is doing in this passage is he's doing exactly what you identified, Patrick, and that is he's setting up a framework for the children of Cain, the descendants of Cain, and the children of Seth. And they're going to serve as a pattern, as a model in the rest of the Bible of sons, where you have the first son who is born generally being the one who is rebellious and who pictures rejection of the things of God, just like his father Adam did. And then you have a later son who is actually called the firstborn, right? I mean, just think about this with Jacob and Esau. So Esau is going to kind of be the new Cain, if you will, and Jacob is going to be this new Seth. And those who are descended from Cain and descended from Seth are going to represent these two lines. One is the line where this nature that we have inherited from Adam is going to be exhibited in death and destruction and killing and destroying and all that sort of thing. And then the other line is going to represent a line of faith, not of good people. Like Seth's descendants aren't all the nice people who are going around doing good things for their neighbors and all that. They're the ones who have faith, the sons of God, as it were, who have faith. And that pattern is what persists all throughout the Pentateuch. That it starts right there in chapter 4, where you set this up, where you have Cain and Abel, and it looks like we're going to focus on those two, but then Abel dies. But then he kind of gets replaced, almost like a resurrection of sorts. But he gets replaced with Seth, and now these two lines are just going to continue on, and you're constantly going to keep coming back to that same pattern over and over again.
That's so good. I think we even touched on that last week. That from chapter 5 on, you kind of see that split in the lineages, right? And then it breaks down even further when you get to Noah, and then it breaks down even further when you get to Abraham. So, really the Pentateuch is about this one big family with a bunch of micro families in it that are really terrible to each other and to God.
Yeah, no, and no, it's great. And the Noah narrative is a big part of this because Noah is a starting over. Right. So you have the exact same thing happen, that all of the people of the earth are destroyed except this one family. And immediately when they come off the boat, Noah, he gets drunk and naked, as it were, when he goes like a Jimmy Buffett concert or whatever. As soon as he gets off the boat,
he plants a vineyard and gets drunk on his own grapes. It's amazing.
Yes. And then is naked and gets, and his sons, it's the same exact thing happens with his sons as happens here, where you have Ham and you have Japheth, and then you have Shem, and it's the same thing as Cain and Abel and Seth. And by presenting it this way, you find that the line that's faithful is not the line who is like the most morally upstanding line all the time, but it's the ones that represent having faith. And so you're gonna get these two brothers, as it were, all the way through. One brother is the evil, wicked, idolatrous brother. The other one is the one that has faith. And that's just going to be this pattern that's going to follow it. You're going to follow it with Ephraim later is going to be kind of this picture of, yep, you're going to be, unfaithful and dishonest, but I'm still going to redeem you. I think the first 4 chapters in Genesis really are like a chapter book. If you have kids or grandkids and you pick up this book and at the beginning of the chapter, it's telling them different words they need to know or ideas. And that's what's happening here. You're getting these concepts, and one pattern that's going to continue to be used in the Bible is these 2 sons. And when you look at Cain being afraid of his other, let's call them brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews, that again, over the course of 130 years would have come into being, that he's going to be understandably afraid of them. There's no reason to think that Abel's family wouldn't be after him as well, that they wouldn't be upset with him. And so he goes to some other people and sets this city up where he can be safe. And again, I think in the narrative, you want to focus on what not necessarily what Cain and Abel and even Seth are doing in this, but what's God doing in that. And it's showing mercy, and it's providing a way out even of this brother killing brother. And that's going to be to have faith, to trust in him.
Can I chase a rabbit for a second? Not a long rabbit trail, just to, because I'll if they let me chase a rabbit, I will chase one till
yes,
kingdom comes. All right, but this past Sunday, I was preaching a sermon on hell, and it was the passage in Luke 16 with the rich man and Lazarus. And it was interesting because I preached that message the same week we had this whole conversation about Cain. And were there ever, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but you're way smarter than me, so you should be able to recall this quickly. No, within early Christian theology, or even throughout the centuries, has there ever been a connection made between almost like Cain's punishment from God being a foreshadowing or a picture of eternal judgment? Because Cain says that he has now been removed from the face of God. Like he is no longer in the presence of God. And so was there any kind of, I mean, I know again, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but any connection there that was ever throughout church history made between Jesus' teaching on hell, being eternally removed from the presence of God, and what Cain experienced there in Genesis chapter 4?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. So the being cursed, being a wanderer, is certainly a part of not just Cain's punishment, but it's what all through the Old Testament you see. Even the children of Israel, right? They're wandering around in the wilderness. There's this picture of wandering. But more importantly, it's the idea of an exile, of a sense of perishing, right? And so you take someone like Irenaeus, who does pick up on this idea of perishing and of being exiled from the presence of God, and you find this in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. I mean, this is the idea of the condemned, is that they do not know the presence of God, that they're, absent from the presence of God. That the greatest part of the punishment in hell, like this eternal punishment, eternal condemnation, is just that. It is the picture of exile from God's very presence. It's not, even the hell fire and the sulfur and those kinds of things. That the greatest cause of concern with regard to eternal punishment is going to be separation from the very presence of God. And that's again, I think, just an important theme to recognize. And whether it's Irenaeus and this whole idea of separation from God, or even you take John Chrysostom, for example. He deals with this issue And for him, it's more in terms of like, even though God is punishing him, there's still this offer of divine restraint.
Mm-hmm.
There's this offer of mercy that comes, that while Cain is punished and lives under his judgment, there's the opportunity to avoid this. And Chrysostom even draws on what Peter says, that it is the will of God that none should perish, should end up with this eternal judgment. But that the punishment that is exacted on Cain is that punishment of wandering, of exile, of fear, of separation from God. But there's this message of hope, if you'll believe, right? If you'll be like Seth, as it were, if you'll believe, you can avoid that. So that his story becomes a warning to us. And I love the way Chrysostom does this, of presenting Cain and the story of Genesis 4 as a cautionary tale, not so much in the like don't kill your brother cautionary tale, but believe, like have faith, otherwise you will perish just like him, because you are guilty of sin. And the sin, the primary sin of Cain is not even in the killing of his brother. The primary sin is in his false worship, his idolatry. The reason why he kills his brother is because he is an idolater in his heart. And that's our problem as well. We also are idolaters at heart. And so we're going to suffer the same fate if we don't believe.
Which is why God tells him at the very beginning of that passage, sin is crouching at the door, right? And its desire is to master you, but you must overcome it. Which leads us, I think, to kind of the next angle of this is sin nature, right? And the origination of sin nature. And so, Patrick, do you want to articulate this, or do we?
Yeah, well, I mean, like to put it, I'll put it simply, like, right? Does Adam have a sin nature prior to the rebellion of God with God, prior to the fall? And why or why not on that, right? Now, obviously, we want to know what the early church thought on this is, and of course, this is where we got into it last week, because as an attorney, I struggle with logic that breaks down, right? Adam comes in, he chooses to sin. He chooses to rebel against God because he received the commandment not to eat of the tree. Yep. And he does it. So the free will is in there, but like he chose sin. He chose, and so that's where we'll go with there. You jump in. And I brought up that, at least my understanding of Eastern theology, early Eastern thought, is that they have a lot less difficulty having two things that seem contradictory be true. And in Western thought, we really struggle with that, right? It's black and white. There's not gray. And I brought up that fact. I was like, maybe I just need to really change how I'm approaching the thought process behind it. But it's definitely a question that I struggle with, so I know others struggle with it.
No, it's a great question, Patrick. And my son is a lawyer as well, so we oftentimes have those same kinds of conversations. And I think what happens in Western Christian thinking a lot is that we approach theology or the question of the fall and sin, et cetera, in purely legal terms, in forensic terms. That it's we're only seeing our sin as acting against some rule or some law, as it were, that we've been given. I think the picture of Adam's sin has to be seen in light of he is a child who is disobeying his father's wisdom. That's this picture. That's why the tree is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or the tree of wisdom. Deuteronomy 29 follows up on the same thing, that talks about children as being those who do not have a knowledge of good and evil. That's kind of how a child is pictured. Is this is a person who we don't hold responsible for the decisions that they make with regard to good and evil if they don't have that knowledge. So instead, what happens is you have command, right? So when God comes to Adam, he gives him a command. He says, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's the command that he gives him. You can eat of any other tree, but don't eat of this one. So he doesn't need to know. At that point, Adam doesn't need to have a knowledge of good and evil because he knows what disobedience is. He's been given the explicit command and what he's not supposed to do or is supposed to do, as it were, and chooses as a free moral creature, he chooses to disobey. And I love that that's the phrase that or the word that the Bible uses for his actions, that he disobeys. Through one man's disobedience, sin enters into the world. And that order of operation, as it were, that Paul uses in Romans 5, I think ought to guide our thinking of what happens. That he's given a command where it's like a child that you say, don't run across the street. The child doesn't need to know about the danger of cars hitting them, doesn't need to know the danger of getting, kidnapped or whatever. All they need to know is that your parent told you don't run across the street. And if you do, you've disobeyed that. The sense then in Romans 5 is because he disobeyed by eating of this particular tree, and again, it's this knowledge of good and evil. It's experiencing and coming to know experientially as well as intellectually what wisdom is, what good and evil is. But because he disobeyed, sin now enters into the world, as it were. So it's not that sin is in the world and causes him to disobey. It's that he disobeys, therefore, Paul says sin enters in the world. So the result for us is that, and I love the way our confessional document, our statement of faith, the Baptist Faith and Message, puts this, that because that happened, and the result is that we now have a nature which is inclined to sin. And since we're in the wilderness, we're outside of the Garden of Eden, we have an environment which is inclined to sin. And that's what our nature is. What I think we want to avoid, and again, we have a lot of Christians who would not want to avoid this, so I get it. But for me, we're trying to avoid a nature that itself is guilty. So rather than having to subscribe to an original guilt, we can subscribe to an original sin, meaning that we have this nature inclined to sin. And the way the Baptist Faith and Message puts it is, when we reach that age for which we're held to account, we will invariably and inevitably sin, like actually, if you will. But a child who, a 3-year-old who steals a toy from preschool or from church, we don't put them in jail for theft, right? We don't imprison them for that theft, because they don't realize that's what is actually going on, even though they have a nature inclined to steal from church. And that's the way it is with human beings. We're all born with a nature which is inclined to sin. And that's what happens with Cain and Abel, to kind of tie it back to that story again, is that they both have a nature which is inclined to sin, which is why they're coming to worship God. They're offering up, they're making offerings to God because of their inclination to sin. And the way that Cain responds to that is to be idolatrous. And the way that Seth is going to, or Abel first, and then Seth is going to respond, is by having faith and trusting God, right worship, as it were.
Yeah, that's good, because I think, again, what kind of gets lost in the transition from chapter 3 to chapter 4, again, we've got a time gap, right? And we've got who knows how many years, but the fact that they are now outside of the garden in the wilderness, as you used to describe it in our classes, in the land of the velociraptors, and the thorns and the thistles, and this is obviously not Cain's first sin, and the argument is never that Abel was sinless. right? That they were born in this post Eden environment and were sinners, right? They had that proclivity to sin, and yet they also had that conscious awareness that they needed to offer sacrifices to God for, I don't know what the language would be there, because I don't know if they had this concept of forgiveness or blessing or what, but obviously idolatry was present in Cain's heart.
Yeah, and again, I mean, they're both grown-ups. They're both adults. Obviously Cain and Abel both. They're working jobs. I mean, they've grown up to do this, and by their offering sacrifices to God, as some in some way an effort to make recognition of their own sinfulness and fallenness that is derived from, seems to be at least, what God does in the aftermath of Adam's sin. So when Adam disobeys and sin enters in the world, God sacrifices an animal to provide a covering, which again is going to be this picture or pattern throughout the Bible of God covering us in the righteousness of this sacrificed lamb, who's going to be Jesus later, obviously. But that has to be read. What's happening in chapter 4 has to be read in light of what happens in chapter 3, both in terms of the disobedience and sin entering into the world, and this sacrifice that's being offered and is taking place at the end of chapter 3.
I like it. Patrick, you got something? He's about to push, Doc, so get ready.
Is disobedience a sin?
Certainly, yeah. And it's what we would call actual sin.
Yeah. So
And
why
so
is
by his, yeah.
why? So we Adam sinned by his disobedience of God, and that's the moment that sin entered the world.
That's right.
And because of that, we all have a nature inclined to sin.
Correct.
Why is that? Why are we any different than Adam was before that moment of disobedience?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great way to put it. So there's not an essential difference between us and Adam prior to that time, as though Adam had a different set of DNA or he was a different kind of creature or whatever. What seems to be the case is that prior to the fall, there's a relational difference. When Adam is formed, the Bible says that God breathed into him the breath of life. And in John chapter 1, John reads that as the very word of God, or the Son of God, the one who becomes incarnate as Jesus. Because he says that this word was the light and the life of men, right? So the life from Genesis 1. What he possessed was right relationship with God. And that right relationship is not a barrier to disobedience, though. So right relationship is the reason why God created human beings, was to know him and to be known by him. Adam knew that. He had that right relationship. When he disobeys as a free moral creature, again, he's not made to disobey. This is why James actually, just as a side note, says the way he does.
Let me jump in right there, all right? Because I want to make sure that I'm clear for our listeners and for you. I don't have a problem acknowledging that Adam was not made to disobey, but I can't square he did disobey, as you say, a moral creature with free will, and not already have the nature to commit sin.
Yeah, it's a great distinction to make. However, what James says is that when we sin, right, when we disobey, that we're simply drawn away by our own desires. So a sin nature, or a nature which is inclined to sin, is not a thing that we get. So it's not like he had a non-sin nature and we have a sin nature. Like, it's not the kind of the Roman Catholic view of passing down something like that you get that's handed down or delivered over is not the same thing as having this nature which is inclined to sin after the fall, because what is lost in the fall is both right relationship with God, which would be an impediment but not a barrier to disobedience, and the Garden of Eden. In some ways, what the Bible is pointing out to us is, if Adam, in the best possible environment, having been directly by God giving the wisdom, don't eat of this tree, is going to disobey, what makes us think we're going to choose anything different?
Yeah.
And so even as Christians, in being in right relationship with God, we're still drawn away by our own desires. But it's not that we have this this thing which we have inherited that is bad. Is that the nature of our humanity is one which is inclined towards sin. And of course we're going to sin, because Adam, who was not inclined to sin, nonetheless disobeyed, giving us the confidence only in the sinless one, that we've got to trust in the sinless one in order to have life again, to have, eternal life, because that's what's lost in the sin. Because it goes on to say, Romans 5 goes on, through one man's disobedience, sin enters into the world, and through sin, death. And the death that he's referring to is the spiritual death that Adam experiences. And that's what we have. We're born spiritually dead. We're separated from God when we're born. It's not that we possess a thing, which is like the sin thing, as it were. It's that we have this nature which is not in right relationship with God, therefore already inclined to disobey, to go against what He's has created us for, and we of course are going to inevitably sin if Adam, who didn't have that inclination, was nonetheless drawn away by his own desires, which is evidenced in what the woman says, that these things are pleasing to the eyes. They're good. This tree, it's good for food, as it were. This desire of the eyes, desire of the flesh, the pride of life, kind of drawing us away. That's the key. The key to Adam sinning isn't that he possessed some nature which was inclined to sin. It was that as a free moral agent, he chooses to disobey, which puts us in this awful condition where now we do have a nature which is inclined towards sin. We have no hope of avoiding sin. Therefore, we have to have a Redeemer who's going to free us from that.
Which, I'm so glad we got to the gospel. Because now we have that, even though we don't have that freedom from the curse, right, the physical death that Adam also experienced because of sin, but we have, we now have eternal life, right, that we have been welcomed into the life and love of God, and we have now received the Spirit, who is, the one that gives us life in Christ, and we now have that, which everything you just said was, for me, it should be convicting to Christians, because it's like now, we now have that same impediment against sin that Adam had. Am I right in that? we now have been welcomed into the life and the love of God.
I actually love the way that he just ended that, because I think it makes it.
He ended it with really bad news.
No, but it really sort of teases out the struggle that we're at, right? Like, and I think you put it beautifully. I'm going to try to rephrase it or repeat it. Is that because in the perfect conditions, Adam disobeyed, we have no hope of not sinning. And I think that really distinguishes what we inherited, right? What we got from the fall and the curse is no hope in doing it on our own. There's no hope without that Redeemer of Jesus Christ to be drawn back into the presence of the Lord. And thank God for that.
That's why the gospel's good news.
Well, yeah. No, Patrick, listen, that is so good. And it becomes a reminder to us that the salvation that we possess is more than just the forgiveness of our sins. It is like we did a bunch of bad things, and Jesus comes and he dies because, I pushed my little brother down, and I beat a little kid up, at school, and I lied to my mom when I was a kid. It's more than that. It is not less than that. As I love the way that Colossians puts this, right? We're transferred from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of the Son, that through the forgiveness of sins, we are reconciled to God. That this is, the depth of our problem is greater than just we broke the 10 commandments and deserve to go to hell because of it. It is that we are separated from God, have no life in him. And the fear is that we're going to perish. We're going to go back into vanity and nothingness. And, there is nothing of value in this world in which we live. And so God comes to us in Jesus, and he forgives us of our sins. He reconciles us to himself. He gives us his own eternal life, and promises to us this inheritance where we're not in a place which is inclined towards sin any longer. And it's not even like the Garden of Eden. It's better than the Garden of Eden. The garden which is to come is greater than the one that even Adam knew. So we're not being restored to something in the past. We're being taken to something in the future which is even greater. And that even now in the present, we have this right relationship with God so that we are not required to sin. That's the thing. I love this. We sin because we want to sin. And so we need to seek to put on righteousness and to mortify the flesh. And the Ezekiel 26 reminds us of this, that God has given us or 36 rather, has given us his spirit so that we might obey. And I just love that, that we have the Spirit of God dwelling in us to enable us to obey him. We've got it much better than Adam ever did.
Wow. Well, one last question from me. Will you be married to Miss Ginger in the new kingdom?
Oh, God, we don't have another hour for this.
I know. I'm not saying we're debating it.
Yeah.
I just want the official take here.
Official.
So in the new heavens and new earth, there's neither marrying nor giving of marriage, but we will know each other. That's the thing. Thessalonians tells us when Jesus arrives, we'll see those who either are being caught up or being raised up, and we will know one another, but not in the relation of marriage.
Okay, that's enough time for today.
Yeah,
we just need to.
I need to do one follow up since he got one. I get to follow up on that one.
I disagree with you.
We will.
I got my degree. It doesn't matter if I agree with you anymore. No.
So we will know each other, but will any of us know each other biblically?
Yeah, that's a fair question. The answer to that is probably no.
Probably.
It's a good question. Because, again, Jesus, the controlling passage for this for us has to be when Jesus is asked about being married multiple times here. To whom are you married after the resurrection? Mm-hmm. And this is where Jesus says there's neither marrying nor the giving of marriage, which to me leads it to be what's being discussed in Genesis 1 and 2 about men and women and their knowing one another biblically for the purpose of procreation, isn't going to be necessary any longer. There's going to be no reproduction in the new heavens and new earth. So we're probably not going to participate in those marital relations in the new heavens and the new earth, if I can put it that way.
Oh, you can put it that way. I want to say, and I'm not asking you to confirm or deny, but I want to say Dr. Aiken had the opposite view, or has the opposite view. I think I remember that from a class, but I may be wrong. I'm not speaking on behalf of Dr. Danny Aiken. I just want to clarify that.
Yes, and neither am I. And
but he's
and
retiring,
on that
so it doesn't
question,
matter.
I'm just going to say, I'm just going to repeat Jesus, that there's no marrying and giving in marriage. Whatever else is there, I don't know the answer to. I'm going to end there.
That's a great one.
That's amazing.
That's a great one to go out on.
Yeah, for sure.
Dr. McKinney, we really do appreciate your time and joining us today on the Man to Man podcast. We have just thoroughly enjoyed getting into these questions this season. And really, I mean, going all the way back to the way that you opened this with the picture of the repetitive themes that Moses is portraying in the Pentateuch to us and how it is pointing us all the way along. It's always pointing us back to God's design, God's provision, God providing a new air, a better way, a path to belief, and ultimately back into the garden in glory. And that's what we're all here for. So thank you for your time today.
Yep.
We appreciate it, and you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see the rest of y'all next week.